Marital rape is a very, very sensitive topic because we have seen a lot of women probably undergoing marital rape.
So now tell me how effective these laws are, because making laws are one whole thing, and keeping it effective and reachable to the society is another different story. So how effective are those laws?
All I tell you is, to make a law effective, you need to have that kind of a case altogether to make it effective.
What case?
Whether it is a domestic violence case or a dowry harassment case, you need to have a proper set of evidences.
When you spoke about Nirbhaya's case, I'm sure you might know that there are two juvenile kids who were involved, two or one probably, one, yeah, involved in the rape of Nirbhaya. Can you just give some light on both the sides of the...
So, for protecting the children who have been victimized of sexual offences, we have POCSO. For children who are committing such offences below the age of 18 years, we have Juvenile Justice Act.
Women are more vocal and they know much about their rights, and they can seek help from many people. But urban areas of the country where the rules or regulations are very strict for women.
They know what it is. They know that there is a legal system. They know that there is a law that will protect them.
So what kind of education or what kind of awareness should we have to give or prepare them for the abuses that they are going through every day? Hello everyone, welcome to Advanced Voice, the podcast where we discuss the issues that shape our society. Today we have a very special guest with us, Mrs. Lalita Sridhar, who is a passionate advocate, and she's here to discuss about a lot of issues which are related to women and child right. Lalita, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Akshita. Thank you for inviting to this podcast.
So now tell me, taking up a law as a career is not very conventional. What motivated you to take up law?
A very interesting question. So, going back about 2 decades earlier, there was this house help who used to come to our house to help us out. And she had always been facing domestic violence, abuse. So was her daughter also was facing a lot of domestic abuses. Uh, Saying that, the amount of problems that they were undergoing, she had to keep quiet because there was no other option. Back those days, there were no stringent laws that helped her out. Nor did she have the kind of emotional support from her parents to come and fight the case. So these things, which were pretty common back those days, was one of the reasons that motivated me to take up law, so that I can help the society, and also probably also help in lot of educating the society, what is right for them, what is not right for them, trauma that they were facing.
That was very noble thing to do, Lalita. So coming back to your story where your domestic help was being abused, is there any laws that you can help our audience to understand what kind of laws that government supports, the law system supports us with?
Akshita, talking about the laws, it's a pretty known factor that India today has a lot of women-centric laws, where we have, Domestic Violence Act.
Okay.
We have, Dowry Prohibition Act. So, where women are protected from such emotional, physical, financial, and physical abuse from the husband as well as the in-laws.
Okay.
So I think we do have some good system where the laws are stringent for any of such abuses.
Okay, great. So now tell me how effective these laws are, because making laws are one whole thing, and keeping it effective and reachable to the society is another different story. So how effective are those laws?
Talking about effective, absolutely they're effective. That's why we have the whole legal system in place to make the laws effective. All I tell you is, to make a law effective, you need to have that kind of a case
Okay.
altogether to make it effective.
What case?
Whether it is a domestic violence case or a dowry harassment case, you need to have a proper set of evidences with you. So if I am abused by my spouse or by my in-laws, whenever I go to the police station to lodge a complaint, the first thing that they're going to ask you is, do you have the proof to show that there is abuse that has happened to you? Do you have any kind of people who are going to support you, whether it can be an emotional support, whether it can be someone who was actually witnessed the person being beaten up or emotionally abused or emotionally cornered.
Okay.
So the very important aspect, if for any law to be effective, is whether do you have a supporting document, supporting proof to show that actually something has happened. Because law in India believes in proof. Law in India believes not just what you say, but what you can prove.
Okay. Probably it can be photographs or testimonials from the witnesses.
Yeah, absolutely. If it is a physical abuse, you can actually see the physical abuse, the scars, the wounds that can be physically seen. But it is very, appropriate thing that when you see physical wounds like scars or scratches, you can easily understand that yes, there's been a physical abuse. My clients usually ask me, ma'am, what do we do? There is no physical abuse as such, but there is mental torture. They emotionally corner us.
Yeah.
How do we tackle some situation? I only tell them, see, there are certain ways you can tackle this. So I keep telling them the only option that you have is to record all the verbal and physical abuse as well, and even emotional abuse. So the point here, what I'm trying to tell is, without any proof, it becomes extremely difficult to go and prove your case before the court of law. So what is very, very important is either you have a testimonial, someone who's seeing you getting abused, seeing you getting mentally tortured. That can also act as a testimonial, or that can act as an evidence in the court of law. So I think these are the basic things that are needed to make a law effective.
Okay. Mostly it is photographs and the testimonials. Okay. So, coming back to the laws, countries like Middle East, the laws are very strict. And have you seen any gaps in our country?
Absolutely, Akshita, because like you say, Middle Eastern has extremely stringent laws. Okay, when it comes to India, we are going towards it, but there are lacunas, or what we call as gray areas. The biggest lacuna or a gap that I think in our system is the slow process that we have. Usually, why don't people come forward to file any case, or why don't people come forward to file a complaint, is because they know the system is pretty slow. They know it is going to take some years of time to get justice. So usually this is one of the main reasons why people don't come forward to, file a complaint or take up a particular case, because they know they can't wait till then to get justice.
True.
So I think this is one of the biggest lacunas that we have, that it is more time consuming, more slow process, and we don't have, for everything, we don't have a fast track courts. And the procedure is extremely lengthy. And also, for the matter of fact, people say that justice is very expensive.
Yeah.
We have seen a lot of people charging too much to take up a certain cases. For that, the government has come up with something called as District Legal Services Authority, or what we call as DLSA, where if anyone wants to avail any legal services for like advocates or pleaders, they can go there, avail it for free. Oh,
For free?
yes.
Okay.
So this opportunity is being given by the government so that the justice is, easily accessible to people, that they don't back out because they don't have the kind of money to invest there. So I think the main lacuna or a gap that I see is the slow system process that we have. I think other than that, that is also slowly changing. We are seeing a lot of digitalization. We are seeing a lot of fast track courts. I think in due course of action, things are going to change.
Okay. What about the taboo and stigma attached to emotional and mental abuse or physical abuse? You know, the family reputation, what my parents think, what my in-laws think. What do you have to say about it?
Yeah, that is one bigger problem or a challenge that we have. See, whatever laws, stringent laws are there, whatever government is trying to provide you for free, there is some sort of awareness that is there. With all this, also, not a lot of women are coming forward to tell about the domestic violence. Not a lot of women are coming forward to tell what kind of harassment they are undergoing in the house. The main reason for this is they are scared. The reputation, the family reputation is in stake, their reputation is in stake. What my parents are going to say, what my in-laws are going to say, what my friends are going to say, what my relatives are going to say. I think this is all there back of their head. Okay, and we see with whatever the government is giving or with whatever laws that are available, even then people are not coming forward to lodge a complaint. See, that is unfortunate, because if a woman can't stand up for herself, then there is going to be no one to stand up on behalf of her. If I'm getting abused, it is me who have to go and stand up. See, no doubt there is an option that the parents are given, the relatives are given an option to go lodge a complaint on behalf of her. But I myself don't want to take it forward, then even the relatives can't help much. So the law clearly says in case the woman can't by herself go and lodge a complaint, a relative of hers or a friend of hers who has seen the abuse, who has witnessed the abuse, can go and complain on behalf of.
Is it possible? There's like a second party.
Absolutely possible. But as a woman, I have to support them. They are standing by me. They are complaining, for me, so that, I don't undergo the abuse more. So at least it is my duty to stand up for what is right, because that is my legal right.
Correct.
So that is one thing that all women, I urge all women to stand up for what is right and stand up for their legal right.
Huh. When it comes to urban areas of the country like Bangalore, metropolitan cities, women are more vocal and they know much about their rights, and they can seek help from many people. But urban areas of the country where the rules are, regulations are very strict for women under the veil, they can't step out of the house, they can't raise their voice, or neither they can't even talk to their, elders in the house. So what kind of education or what kind of awareness should we have to give or prepare them for the abuses that they are going through every day?
Very true, Akshita, because I think the metropolitan cities are kind of, they know what it is. They know that there is a legal system. They know that there is a law that will protect them. At least they are aware of the basic things, because you are more prone to social media. You are more prone to TV ads. You have friends. You can discuss it with them. Relatives are there. So it is more easily accessible. But when you talk about rural areas, like you say, accessing law becomes extremely, remote when you go to, rural areas. Back in talking about the remoteness and talking about awareness, back in my college days, we used to have something called as legal aid camps, where our college used to organize legal aid camps, where about 60 of us would go to a particular village and create awareness amongst people with respect to different laws that are existing. Okay. We go to each home, we tell them that these are the laws that are there, this is what you can do, and we'll ask them, if you have any trouble, please let us know. We'll try to give best solution that we can give. This is called as legal aid camp that we used to do, and we used to do skits in the village. We used to call everyone in the village and, create an awareness. The skit used to have one social, problem and the solution to it that the law gives. So all these things we used to do back in those days. I'm sure the law colleges or the universities now also has legal aid camps. But what I personally feel is the legal aid camps, the number of legal aid camps that happens across India, I think it should be increased, from the government side as well. We should create a lot of awareness programs. We should take NGOs on board where, we go to each of the rural areas, spread awareness that there are laws like this which will protect women, children, whether it is any gender laws also, that creating awareness is what is very important. And I think, law colleges, universities coming together along with NGOs, with the government, can do a drastic change, in bringing about awareness in the rural areas. I think that, kickstart is needed from the university level, is what I feel.
About the NGOs, there must be definitely some grassroots organizations that working towards well-being of women and children. Do you want to mention some of them so that our audience are aware of it?
Absolutely. There are a lot of NGOs that are working pan India. There are a lot of NGOs that are helping women and children in Bangalore or in Karnataka as well as pan India. We have some, to mention some, we have, Stri Shakti NGO. We have Child Welfare NGO. We have Choti Si Asha NGO. We have 181. It's a, helpline call number where you can go, tell your problems and they'll come to your rescue. And we have a state commission, state welfare commission. We have National Women Commission. We have. So there are a lot of commissions and NGOs like this where, pan India level they work. And they try to give, right directions to women who are absolutely lost with this violence that are happening in home. They are being threatened. So, this is an NGO where they can always go and, take help from them, try to tell their issues so that these NGOs can guide them for what is right and what is not. Yeah, I think, audiences listening to this, you can take help if you're facing, or if your friends are facing any such issues. You can go to these NGOs which are going to help you to guide your friend or you through the whole process.
And I also recently, to mention, I saw a reel, okay, where woman with the camera on, she's running from on the streets and seeking help from social media platform because husband is chasing her and try to beat her up. So I think social media we can also leverage social media to seek help. What do you feel? Is it responsible enough to seek help from social media?
Absolutely, yes, I feel, Akshata, because right now we are we are in the Gen Beta generation going on right now. Gen Z, Gen Alpha, or whatever you want to call, multiple generations have come through with the influence of social media right now. Even to add to what you're saying, recently also I saw, Facebook Live where some part of North India, a woman was beaten up by her husband and in-laws, and one of the person was going a Facebook Live showcasing how they're ill-treating the woman. So a lot of people are taking help of social media to get justice or to ask people what they can do. And also a lot of women, very surprisingly and very fortunately, a lot of women are coming forward to social media to tell their stories as to how they, came out of an abusive marriage, how they, tackled the abusive in-laws, how they were able to get through all of this. So we see a lot of women coming through the social media, telling their stories, making sure that they educate other women as to how to go about it. Absolutely, social media can play a very, very important role. But nonetheless, we should not do a media trial. That is something, I don't support of. It's a subjective opinion. I don't support of media trial because we are no judges to say this person is right, that person is right. We are just, showing as a media, we're just showing what is there. We are no one to sit there and discuss on have opinions on who's right, who's not right, what is there, what is not there. We have a legal system for that case, which are absolutely in place to look into all the intricacies. I think except for the media trial, rest of the other things, taking social media as one of the platforms to express issues, to get feedback, to tell your stories, and to get support, it's absolutely fine.
Okay. Very true. Very true. So when we're talking about physical and mental abuse, okay, which can always be shown and talked about, there is one very, very conservative, very particular topic that I want to bring it up now, which is marital rape. Okay. Women can't even express because of certain private, very, very private matter that you can't bring it to the family to help her. What is your take on marital rapes and how much in percentage is it happening in India?
Right. Marital rape is a very, very sensitive topic because the whole concept is totally putting the center on the absence of consent.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you have a consent, it is not rape. If you don't have a consent, it is rape.
Even it is your husband.
Yeah, absolutely. So marital rape is as now, and the moment a girl is married, the concept of consent is considered to be not there and all.
Correct.
Irrespective of whether a woman wanted, whether a woman is not okay with it, she is supposed to go through the whole process. So that is what is kind of imbibed in the woman from the start. Right? So right now in India, marital rape is not considered to be a major challenge, or it is not considered to be prohibited. Nonetheless, there are a lot of voices which are coming in from the women NGOs, from the woman herself, that no means no. Irrespective whether I am married, whether I am not married, if it's a no, it's a no. So I think this is slowly started, and I also believe that, when a woman says a no, that should be respected. True, right? Whether it is husband or someone else, irrespective of that, it's woman's choice. Woman also has a choice. So I think that also needs a recognition. So yeah, that is my take on the marital rape, Akshita.
So marital rape, one very challenging thing for a woman outside is workplace harassment as well. So harassment is everywhere, and how do we deal with it? And how do a law help us in dealing with such issues?
Yeah, absolutely. We have law in place for workplace harassment. So we have something called as POSH, like a sexual work. Yeah, sir. Yeah, a Sexual Workplace Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplaces Act, where law clearly says that there should be an internal committee, we call as ICC committee, to be there in every establishment, every company, where more than there are about 20 employees. You need to have a committee which sits, and that committee needs to have an external committee member who might be from the legal fraternity. So it is very important that employees are educated about such committee being there, because that is very, very important on the first place. Because if a woman do not know that there is a committee like this, they would not know who to approach, what to do if in case they're harassed in the workplace, right? So first of all, informing or creating that awareness amongst the employees is very, very much needed. And once you create the awareness, you inform them as to what is the process to it. How do a woman who's being harassed, what is the process to it, where she needs to go file a complaint there, and then the internal committee is going to call for and ask what happened, where she needs to give everything in writing, and again, it is based on the proof whatever she has. recordings, photographs, or messages. All these can act as a proof. The same is submitted to the ICC. They are going to listen to it. They are going to hear the other side. That is also very important because we have seen a lot of instances where this law is misused as well. Okay,
For promotion's sake.
yeah, for promotion's sake, for other things, revenge. No, all these are misused also. So, law is extremely gender neutral. They see that, both the parties, that's the natural justice concept where both the parties have to be heard. So the men also, if they're accusing the men also have to be heard. Their story also have to be heard of as to what exactly happened, and then finally they'll come to a decision. If you want to take that decision, fair enough, or if you want to file a larger complaint on a different level, take it beyond the committee that has been set up, you can absolutely do that. So all I tell is women, one is not to misuse the law which is there to protect them, because a lot of women are actually harassed in the workplaces, but to make use of such laws in a relatively good manner where you be the voice for a lot of women who do not have the voice. You go and lodge a complaint and stick to it, okay, and then stand for what is right. Correct. So this is my say on that.
So, wherever you go, evidences plays the most important role, whether it can be physical harassment from the spouses or from the in-laws or workplace harassment or marital rape. Any sketch, like evidence are the most important things that one has to consider. True. So, when we talk about abuses and marital rapes, the one thing, the product of all this is probably separation or probably, divorce. So there are kids involved when there is a marriage or somebody is getting separated. If there is a kid involved, what are the laws when the kid is under 18 or under such certain age? Do the justice listen to the kid or listen to both the parties? How the entire process go?
So yeah, usually whenever we talk about domestic violence or dowry harassment, we know where this is heading towards to. We know that this is totally heading towards to the separation or what we call as divorce, right? So we usually tell the clients that if you're looking for a divorce, parallelly you can run a divorce case as well, where you can seek separation from the spouse based on your grounds of domestic violence or dowry harassment and all this. Now, where the tricky part comes is when there is a kid, right? Like you say, kids have this major, role to play here, because this is the age where usually when they are small, it will be the age where they'll be growing, where they would need both mother and others, love, care, affection, for them to have a nice, the childhood, to grow into a better human being, right? So we have seen instances where, due to the egos between the partners, the child's welfare is usually at stake. Now we have a lot of judgments all through these many years, which says that child's consideration or child's paramount welfare is what is taken care by the court. So whatever is benefiting to the child's welfare, that is what the court is going to take into consideration. They are going to ask the child, whether do you want to stay with both the parents, whether do you want to go with the mother or the father. Usually what happens is, if the kid is below the age of 5 or 7 years, usually the custody is given to the mother.
Okay.
Because it is believed that mother can nurture the child pretty well, and the child needs mother during this phase of the age. But what happens is, the court also sees, is the mother rest. So the court is going to consider certain aspects like whether the mother is financially capable, whether she can, look after the child, and also whether she'll be able to give the kind of time that is needed to the child. So all these considerations are taken, and then the child has also asked whether who it wants to get spend some time with. Based on all this, the court usually decides who to give the custody to. But what is very important here is the consideration that the child's welfare is what the court takes into, and only then, the court gives the order as to who it has to go with.
Okay.
And also, visitation rights is always being given. The father can visit the kids during weekends, or the mother can visit the kids during the weekends. Depending upon who gets the custody, there'll be visitation option that will be given. So those things are what are there to protect the child when the parents undergo the separation.
Basically, co-parenting is the key for the entire process. And is there any instances where you have noticed that mother is not ready to show the kids to the father, or the vice versa?
Yeah, we actually had a case wherein the mother was absolutely not ready to show the kid to the father, and the father was literally in tears, wanting to see the kid. So the judge took the extra personal effort, to talk to the child to understand what the kid wants. And the kid said no, it wanted to go with the father also. So we have such judges, we have such people who take extra effort to talk to the kid, and make it a little bit child friendly, where the child opens up as to what the child wants, whether it wants to talk to the father, whether the child wants to go with the father. That is very important. I usually what I have seen all through my 12 years of practice is that usually marriages break because of the ego. This is usual thing, that there is a lot of ego between either of the spouses, and because of that there is a strain that creates slowly, and the relationship slowly waits to the process of divorce. So I think if egos are kept aside, at least for the sake of the kid, because kid needs both the parents, like you said, co-parenting is the key. I think co-parenting is very, very needed when the child is growing. And I personally believe that if the egos are kept apart, the kid can get both the parents, and and judges who are extremely nice, and who actually take up things very seriously, considering the child's welfare. I have seen multiple instances where child's interest is taken as a paramount consideration for giving custody.
The child is the one who suffers a lot. How do law compensate for the social emotional well-being of the child when mother and father are fighting, court, they have to constantly appear in the court, and the judge being asked whether whom you want to stay with? The child probably would go through the very bad phase. And what about their social emotional well-being? Is there any kind of help that they get from the law?
See, there are counselors, that those are there to help the children. We also have child psychologists who are there to navigate them through the process. But as such, there is no law or say which says that there needs to be someone to guide them through the process. But nonetheless, they have specific setups if the parents want to take the child for child counseling, or child psychologists, counselors to guide them through the whole process. There is absolutely someone to help them out. It's just that you need to seek such guidance.
So, coming out of the entire marriage setup, what we are discussing, should be an entire focus on marital issues, your conflicts between husband and wife, not to a total different problem that India is facing from very long time, that is prostitution. My first question is it legal in India?
Right. So prostitution per se is not legal, but at the same time, it's not illegal. Okay.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. So basically, when I say it is not illegal, then why is it not legal as well? So that's a gray area, right? So here, what we call as illegal because the fact that you're not supposed to run a brothel,
Mm-hmm.
you are not supposed to solicit
Okay.
that you have a sex worker and you can send them, and child prostitution. All these are considered to be illegal. Otherwise, we have a lot of area, what we call as red light areas across India, and it's been there from a long time. And if you see history, there the concept of prostitution was pretty much there. So the concept of prostitution is not an illegal concept, or it's not considered illegal, but soliciting child prostitution or forcing the sex workers to do prostitution is illegal.
Okay. So what you're trying to say is prostitution is very much illegal when somebody is forcing you to do it.
Absolutely.
And how about people who are doing prostitution or sex work are denied from their basic human rights, like minimum wages or some human rights? They are abused physically, mentally, emotionally. So, is there any law that helps them, or it's just illegal thing to do?
So this is the gray area I was talking about, because as such we do not have any laws to protect the sex workers who have been forced to it, okay, or who have been pushed to it because of the poverty or their social economic background, because they have no other option but to do to get into prostitution. The main problem here is they do not have any law to protect their interest. We do not have supporting labor law. We do not have, like you said, there's no minimum wages that are fixed to them. The basic concept of right to life, right to livelihood is missing. It is not recognized per se as a profession. The moment a particular industry is recognized as a profession, they get certain, rights, they get certain kind of protection from the law. But unfortunately, prostitution as a profession or a career is not recognized, and there's no as such law to protect these sex workers. I think that is where there is a gap, and we need to fill the gap with law which is going to protect these sex workers.
Okay, I was just watching some documentary on Kamatipura, where a sex worker, she came and told about the wages. Sometimes they work for 50 rupees to 100 rupees, and physical abuse is another story. The abuse that these women get, the HIV testing and not using contraceptives, and all those sadistic things that men actually commit, abuse those women, are kind of something that we really have to talk about it. And do you think legalizing prostitution is key to solve all these problems?
More than legalizing the prostitution, what is very much needed is protection of sex workers.
So that happens only when you legalize it.
Right. When you legalize the concept, you bring in certain things, certain measures, which is going to protect these sex workers.
And you will not hide your identity as a sex worker when you legalize it.
Exactly. So as a profession, when something is getting recognized, because see, when you take, I am an advocate, someone else is a doctor, someone else is a teacher. So you have a recognition of the profession, and then there are certain laws that are made to protect these professions. Similarly, what we are trying to push upon here is to recognize prostitution as a career or a profession. If someone is interested, or if someone is willing to do, we have so many agencies that are there in India right now who are running this escort agencies, okay?
So now you tell me, what is the difference between being a prostitute and being a escort?
See, usually it's the same word, which is just, given that fancy touch by the, escort. Usually there are companies wherein they're running escort agencies Usually it's more or like a corporate company. They have certain they have minimum wages that are fixed to them. There are timings that are fixed to them. There are certain policies like they're not supposed to be beaten up. They have no physical abuse. There are certain rules and regulations that the client who's hiring an escort from a company, they'll have to follow those guidelines. Only when they do all those things, and usually the pay scales are pretty high for the escort, usually then they send the escort to that person. So there are certain terms and conditions which are already signed up by the client. So usually that's what you call
Oh, yeah, that was what we require the same thing even in the
exactly what they're corporatizing, or whatever they're making it more in a corporate way. We are asking a law so that the prostitutes who are not coming under this ambit as an escort will also be recognized and protected by the law. We don't want, just because they're prostitutes, just because they're sex workers, treated very downtrodden, or they're misused by the public officials also, which we have seen in a lot of documentaries. We have heard it from a lot of people, and it's shown in the movies as to how sex workers are ill-treated with the public officials, by the public officials as well. So we don't want such
and they treat them as a public property. What I feel is
yeah, very true. There are a lot of instances that way.
Yeah.
So I think what we're trying to push right now is to legalizing prostitution in India, giving it the word. When you say it is not illegal, and you're not in any way saying it is legal also, don't keep the gray area. Make sure you legalize it. Real
law rights.
Yeah, give them the law, give their legal rights to fight whatever is the truth, whatever is the right for, and give them certain wages which will save their dignity.
Yeah. That's why when they are harassed, they can't go to police. As it is, it's an illegal work that they are doing.
Right.
Yeah. So is there any kind of stories that you want to narrate to our audience where you come across these brothels or a woman will be pushed to prostitution?
Going back to about 2 decades ago, when I was studying law, I was working with this NGO where they received a complaint from one of the neighborhood, from one of the person who's staying in the same neighborhood, saying that one of the houses is running a brothel, right? And the women are pushed to it. They had no other option but to succumb to such force. So this was informed to this NGO, and right when I was kind of part of that NGO. Yeah, basically to highlight back about 2 decades ago, I was part of one of this NGO, and we got to know that they received a call from one of the neighbors from the same neighborhood saying that there's a brothel that was happening in a particular house, and women were forced to be sex workers there. So getting the complaint, this NGO wanted to visit them with the help of the local police and everything. They took the help of the local police. They raided the brothel home. They saw a lot of women were forced to this concept of sex working, and they were abused, they were misused. And for what? Like you said, for 50 rupees, 100 rupees, they were pushed to it. They were threatened. And we were able to, help about 5 to 6 sex workers. This is a very, very strong memory that remains with me forever. And, I think looking at, this is just a small example.
What was the condition of the entire place when you...
It was not a nice place to be. The rooms were really dirty. The place was really small, congested. Women had absolutely, there was no contraceptives. They were in a very bad condition, and mentally, emotionally, they were down. They were abused. So a lot of things were part of that whole system, which was so negative. So in this thing, what I understood, this whole thing, what I understood was that women, especially who are forced into, as sex workers, they undergo a lot of mental and, emotional trauma. So that needs a stop, and that can be only achieved if there is a law to protect their dignity. True.
So, is there any rescue story you want to apart?
Yeah, so the same thing. So the people were rescued from here. They were brought to this the police station. They were they kind of questioned as to what happened. Why were they pushed to this? And they explained, obviously, because the poverty reasons, because some of them were, they didn't know anything else other than this. And no awareness. And also some of them had no education. So all of them had different stories. So they clearly said they were forced to it. So there were a lot of NGOs who were ready to help these kind of people.
Probably upskilling them. I mean, like in workforce where they can.
Yeah, that is mandatory, because only once you upskill them, you give them the kind of skill that is needed. If they want to study, give them the education. If you want to, probably have some sort of skills like tailoring or, embroidery work or anything that they want to learn and, achieve in that field, you'll have to probably push them for that. And only once they become independent that way, financially independent, will they not think back of going to such brothel homes, or they'll not be forced to do, sex. So I think this is what is needed, and this is the initiative we want the government along with NGOs to take up, to create that awareness, to create the law, and to also give freedom to those people who actually want to take it up as a profession. If they want to take it up as a profession, then the rights have to be protected. It should not be abused or misused. That is what we want.
Adding on to that, what I feel is, along with the government aids and everything, even the society as a people, we have to accept them as a part of our society and give them jobs and security, whatever is needed.
Absolutely. Now, today, we are all happy that LGBTQ has been recognized, given a status as a third gender. Similarly, we want the sex workers to be recognized in different, aspects of life. And, only once the law is strong enough, will you be able to, give them the work, not considering them as a different entity or altogether, right? So we want inclusiveness is what we need. Yes, I guess.
So I also heard many times where a prostitute being pregnant and the baby is taken away from her and kept in a separate brothels. Once the baby is reached certain age of say 9 to 13 years old, then she being pushed to prostitution again. And also there are child trafficking, where many of the girls, they say every child is picked up from Indian streets, like 1 per 3 minutes. That is the statistics that I recently heard. So all these girls are pushed into traffic or prostitution, and the prostitute kids also being pushed to prostitution. What are the legal aids that these kids will get? Will they get rescued, or any NGOs, will they come and help them? How is this?
I mean, yes, as we talk now, there might be one might be picked up, okay? We have a lot of human trafficking that is a major pressing issue in India as well as in Bangladesh. So, if you see the index, Bangladesh is one such big country which is having a lot of human trafficking as well, which is pretty much evident, and it is kind of covered by most of the international media. Yeah. So what we usually see is, yes, these children are picked up and they are forced for human trafficking. They're forced to do prostitution. We have stringent laws when it comes to children in India, right? So it's just that we need people to come up, step up, and speak for these kids, because we can't expect the kids to speak for themselves. So if we need someone who is acting as a guardian of these kids and speaking up for them, absolutely, we have such stringent laws in India which is going to save them, which is going to rescue them through all this trauma that they undergo.
Okay, while talking about kids, see, whether it can be a prostitute or a person, a regular employee, or a married woman, if she is pregnant and doesn't want to continue the pregnancy, of course, there are a lot of laws which protects women and, they help the women to achieve their needs, whatever they, whether they want to continue with the pregnancy or not. But there are certain hospitals and doctors who actually create certain dramas to perform what they want. It can be prostitutes or any a normal person like you and me. If we have an unwanted pregnancy, there is a great taboo exists in India to get an abortion done. Even though people know abortion is legal, but still certain doctors and hospitals play a very dramatic role in judging a person or a lady who comes for an abortion. What do you have to tell the entire society about it, tell doctors about it?
Yeah, abortion is a very, the tricky concept. So we have Medical Termination Act of 1971, which clearly says that, you can terminate the baby up to 24 weeks. Initially it was lesser than that. Only then you could terminate the baby. But now they have pushed it across where you can terminate the baby up to 24 weeks.
That's almost 6 months.
Yes, almost 6 months. But then there is a medical board that is set up, which will have certain doctors to analyze and understand why do you want to terminate the baby, and if they find that there is absolute reason for you to terminate the baby, then yes, you can go ahead and do the termination of the baby. Now, until 2021, if I'm not wrong, you had to take consent from your spouse or your guardians to get the baby terminated.
Oh.
Right. So there was this amendment which came in 2021, which clearly stated that if you are unmarried or married, in this case also, only consent that is needed is from the person who's pregnant. There is no requirement of consent from the husband or any other third person. Right? This was a major, change that was brought about. There was a lot of hue and cry on that. People said, no, this is not right. We know the spouse is also relatively important in this. So even he needs to know whether the termination should happen or not. But then at the end of the day, the court said, look, it is the woman who has to take the baby inside her for 9 months. So it is the woman is the right person to decide whether she wants to have the baby or not, which was pretty much was what was needed, because it is the woman who can say whether she wants to have the baby or she does not want, because she's the one who's going to carry the baby for 9 months. So this 2021 amendment which came in brought a huge change in the concept of consent again. Right? And today the consent of third party is needed only when the girl is less than 18 years. That's where she's minor. Okay? Or the girl who's pregnant is mentally ill. Only then a third party intervention is needed. Otherwise, if a girl is unmarried and she's above the age of 18 years, there is no consent that is required. She herself is more than sufficient to go to the hospital and get the abortion done, right? And women also who are married, they need not take the permission from their spouses. If they feel that they cannot have the baby, by all means they could go get the abortion done. So the law is pretty much clear and straightforward on this particular aspect.
It's like my body, my choice.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay. So when you spoke about a girl being pregnant before 18, a minor, so that hits me on a something different a level of physical abuse in kids. Yeah, okay. That is probably very common in India, and lot of kids are physically abused or mentally abused, emotionally abused and sexually abused. So what kind of laws that we have to protect our kids from sexual abuse especially? What kind of laws do we have?
This is a very important topic, Akshita, because since 2019, there have been a lot of talk about this whole change that has come in the legal field. We call it as POCSO. POCSO is prevention of child sexual harassment. That's a nice question, Akshita. Now, basically, since 2012, we have protection of children from sexual harassment. So we have something called as POSCO, where it specifically concentrates on the children below the age of 18 years who have been victims of sexual abuse.
Okay.
Right? So this particular law came in 2012. A lot of amendments has happened. One such big amendment was in 2019, where death penalty was granted if in case anyone found to be abusing a child below the age of 18 years and it is proved that yes, that person has abused the child. To what extent the person has abused the child, depending upon the heinous crime that is committed, death penalty can be given. So this was the new amendment which came in 2019. And, this has been a very, very important law when we speak about children, right? And best part of this particular POCSO is, the concept of gender neutrality, because it is gender neutral, right? When I say child, it means both boy and girl. It concentrates on both boy and girl, right? And it is below the age of 18 years. And it is the very, very important thing that we have to understand is the cases that are put here or lodged here, it comes to a child-friendly courts. So where the judges who are sitting there are usually, are very extremely child-friendly. There are psychologists who sit there, you have counselors who sit there. And the specific, law clearly states that you have to fast track this, right? You can't take all your sweet time to give justice to the kid. You will have to fast track. It is this, fast track code that we follow.
Fast track is what is the duration of fast track?
Fast track is usually 1 year, within 1 year from the date of filing the charge sheet. Charge sheet has all the, explanations given by the police as to what is the crime that this person has committed under what provision of law. So after filing the charge sheet, within 1 year, you're supposed to give justice to the kid. And another best part about the matters in POCSO is that these children don't meet the accused. So there is no face-off between the kid and the accused. Whoever, they're saying that that person has abused them sexually, they don't get to meet that person. So in this way, it becomes easier for the kid to
Kind of
stay.
Providing a protective environment.
Exactly, it is more protective environment where the kid can directly talk to the judge and inform what has happened, what the child has gone through, because you have a counselor sitting there, you have psychologists sitting there to understand what the kid has undergone, and to be there as an emotional support to these kids. So in that way, we have a very very, very strong law when it comes to sexual harassment for these kids. And also, the punishments are pretty much high. And, the offenders have to be really careful on what they're doing. And there is another, added advantage to this particular law. That being, if a person already knows that a particular kid has undergone, sexual harassment and keeps quiet and does not lodge a complaint, then that person can also be penalized with fines, penalties, right? So here what they're trying to do is they're trying to punish those people also, especially the parents who are aware that the child has undergone such harassment and that yet keeping quiet with the concept of what we spoke earlier, the concept of society, honor, what the reputation of the family, they just keep quiet. In such situation, if the court comes to know that even after knowing that the child was abused, they're keeping quiet, then the court has a liberty to, award them penalties for not coming up before the court and filing the complaint.
I think that is a need of an hour where the child, she or he can't speak for themselves. Neither they will understand that they are being abused.
Right.
There's certain age where 3-year-old, 2-year-old are being abused. They don't even know that they are being abused.
Right.
So at certain stages where there is an elder intervention is required and the very right thing to do. Is there any story that you've come across which moved you? Any abuse where a child has to go through?
Yeah, talking about the story, this happened to one of our clients. This was a 8-year-old kid, and she had to undergo a lot of emotional trauma, pain, because of the fact that she was, sexually abused by her uncle who was staying in her house as a guest. And it had been 1 year since he had come to the house, and he was sexually abusing this 8-year-old kid. And he also threatened her that if she goes and tells anything to the parents, he's going to harm her. And out of fear, she never told her parents what this uncle was doing to her.
How did it?
That the mother one day questioned, because the girl, she saw the girl going into depression. So she was very active student. She was getting good marks, and suddenly her marks started dipping down, and she was not in right state of mind. She was depressed. She was sitting all alone, and I think mother also saw a lot of physical changes in the kid, and thought it is better to question if there's something that is that the kid wanted to tell her. And when the mother asked the details and the kid explained everything, did the mother realize that there was been a harassment that is happening to the kid from past 1 year? That's when the parents came before the court and filed a case against that uncle. And it was a very sad state of affairs to see the kid going through so much of trauma for 1 year, and taking all this because the kid was threatened. Imagine the state of psychological state of the kid. The child counselors, the child psychologists were there. They were trying to help the kid.
These child psychologists are from the government or from this? Okay.
There should be Section 19 of the Act clearly says that you need to have counselors and child psychologists to be part of this proceedings, so that the children are not scared to tell whatever it is, what they have undergone, because it is very important for the children to stand up and say things, because at the end of the day, it is the children who have undergone the whole drama, right? So this one incident kind of moved me a lot, because it is impossible to even imagine what the kid would have undergone for a whole 1 year. And imagine the amount of scar that the kid is
Yeah, she's gone. She'll definitely have scar for the entire life.
Exactly.
Being a mother, I can totally imagine and relate to what goes, for the child to bring back to a normal thing.
Absolutely.
Being normal, it's very difficult for the child since she's been scarred for life.
Absolutely. She's scarred for life, and to even come back to normalcy, it's going to take a lot of time for the kid.
So you told there is a proper psychological counseling and support and intervention from the. Have you seen any change in that girl after being counseled and?
Yeah, I think, it, other than the counseling part, other than the, child psychologist part, what we actually need is also the support from the parents. That emotional support is very much needed by the parents to the kid, because at the end of the day, child psychologists or the counselors are always the third person, right? The first people who the kid approaches is for the parents. So what we actually want to see in these kind of cases is the support that the kid receives from the parents. I know it is a very tough thing for the parents also. It's not easy to come up and say that this has happened to their kids.
And probably if it is family going against the entire family is also a big thing.
Exactly. And also the peer pressure, the family pressure, they coming outside and speaking about what their kid has undergone, considering the fact, see, nonetheless, we have a lot of in-camera proceedings that happens here. There is nothing which publicly anyone can see. It is all in-camera proceedings that happens, right? The identification or, the identity of a person is not revealed anywhere. You won't get it in any public forum. With that also, we have very less few people who come there and represent their kids, right? So what we expect out of these parents is a little emotional support to their kids.
Right.
You know?
Rather than thinking of Samaj kya kahegi and people what people say, and sometimes the elders will ask them to shut their mouth because somebody in the family who is involved in all these nonsense things. So probably support from the parents and the society is
Very much, very much. So we need that kind of parents, who's going to
in the way like Samaj kya kahegi and elders in the family, they think that our family reputation is going to go for a toss. So they try to shut the parents up and ask them to be quiet. Or sometimes it so happens that a girl, they push the girl to get married. Right. Yeah, absolutely. So is there anything that you have to talk about it?
Yeah, this is pretty much common, Akshita, because they don't want the kids' identity to come out. But to tell them, in the courts, when I say POCSO matters, most of this are rather all of them are in-camera proceedings. So the identity of the kid never comes out. So they don't have to worry that what will people say, what will happen if my child's face comes out or child's name comes out. No, none of that is going to happen, because even the courts, even the law are pretty much aware that how people are going to start seeing the kid if the kid's identity is getting revealed, or if that particular kid's photo or identity is put on the internet. Say, for example, till date we don't know who Nirbhaya is.
Correct.
Yeah, right?
Sure.
We have no clue who Nirbhaya is, but all of us stood for Nirbhaya, right? The name was changed, the identity was changed. Why? The reason was to make sure that the identity is protected, so tomorrow there is no issue that happens. Now, why we all got to know? Because the kind of heinous crime that was committed on Nirbhaya, did the whole of India came together and understood. Imagine the same incident might have happened in a remotest of remote village. None of us will get to know. So what we are right now asking is for that the parents need not worry about the identity, that their children identity is going to come out, or their their family reputation is going to go. All we are asking the parents is, please come out, stand for your kid, because the kid can't speak for itself. You as parents have to take up the responsibility to stand for the kid and show the kid that tomorrow anything such thing happens to them, they have to stand up for what is right.
Correct. Well said. Well said. When you spoke about Nirbhaya's case, I'm sure you might know that there are two juvenile kids who were involved, two or one probably, one, yeah, involved in the rape of Nirbhaya. So here there is one angle of kids being a victim, and here kids being an offender, right? So can you just give some light on both the sides of the
Yeah, very true. I mean, this is the actual, what do you say, the best part of law, because law protects the victims who are being victimized for sexual harassment. At the same time, there are offenders who we call as child offenders, who below the age of 18 years would have committed the crime, right? So for protecting the children who have been victimized of sexual offenses, we have POCSO. For children who are committing such offences below the age of 18 years, we have Juvenile Justice Act, right? So Juvenile Justice Act not just controls, or rather, punishes, not punishment as such, but tries to rehabilitate and change such offenders, child offenders below the age of 18 years. The Juvenile Justice Board also has the child care that, that is taken care. Like, you see a lot of orphans who are there on the road. Some of the children are abandoned by the parents. Okay, some of the kids are mentally ill, and they're left on the roads. So they take up such orphan kids, such mentally unstable kids, okay, and such kids who are not having anyone and they're just abandoned. Such kids are taken care by the Child Welfare Committee. There's a committee which sits called Child Welfare Committee, who takes up such children and makes sure that they're given right education, they're sent to observations home. There are separate home where child care home is there, where they're put there, and they're kept in absolute absolutely they are kept under observation, and they've given whatever education is needed. They have been, they would be given food, shelter, everything taken care by the government, all in all.
So, is there any duration that juvenile kids has to go through? A maximum, like 14 years? Do they have to be in jail for 10 years?
No, it is not really about the jail. So what they call it as reformative rehabilitation. We have observations hope. So from below the age of 16 years, if a kid is doing any sort of heinous crime, then they basically put him to reformative rehabilitation center, where they teach him why he should not be doing.
So, that's not jail.
That's not relatively a jail. They don't treat them in a jail like that. It is more reformative. It is more rehabilitation center kind of a thing. Between 16 to 80, if there is a crime that is committed, in those 2 years, the court is going to understand whether the person who has committed the crime had an idea or had a knowledge of this and still committed the crime.
Because they're pretty much young adults.
Yeah, they're adolescent, they would have come to that age where they understand what it is. So, they're going to understand whether, they are capable enough to understand what kind of crime they're committing. And if they feel, yes, they're able to understand the kind of crime that they have committed, then they're going to, give it to the normal court where, they've tried under normal laws which are there. They don't specifically come under the laws of, the juvenile justice. Right? So they go to the normal laws and they're treated like a normal offender. But whenever the court feels that no, this person actually did not have an idea of what they were doing, they just did it without any idea, that's when they come under the ambit of juvenile justice.
Is there any, do you have any idea about the youngest juvenile prisoner?
As such, they don't reveal the names, as everything is pretty much, in secrecy. But yeah, we have seen juvenile offenders from the age of 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. Yeah, that's out of poverty, no other option. They would have committed some sort of a small offense. You have a lot of petty offenses. They come theft, because they're hungry. They go do the stealing, part, and then they eat. So you see some small petty offenses, but yeah, you have seen some offenders at the age of 8 years, 9 years.
There's a one serial killer, the youngest serial killer who killed 3-4 girls, babies from the family.
Yeah. You come across such people. You also see offenders who would have killed their own father because own father might have been abusive father. So abusing the mother, abusive father. So in such instances, you see such offenders also. Now for them, reformative rehabilitation only works because you have to because they're very vulnerable, and in that point, they are alive as well. So in that point in time, you push them to all these things, push them to serious, imprisonment. It is going to change their whole ideology of life, right? But I have also seen one person who was a child offender today practicing in the same court and helping multiple child offenders getting justice. So it is such a nice thing. I mean, coming from the roots, coming from that background, they very well know what a child undergoes, and standing up for such child offenders is such a great thing to be doing. So yeah, you meet such amazing people who have outgrown with all those shackles that they were put forth during that time, and they've come out to be a great person. Or total reformation. Yeah, total absolute reformation. That's the whole concept of the juvenile justice post. They want to.
I mean, really, we should appreciate the government to bring such initiative. So they might be very young and naive. They might not be knowing what they are doing. So punishing them for the entire life, it's not a right thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. So, that is why, a lot of, there are people who want to take it otherwise and say, no, they should also be punished. We have seen what during during the Nirbhaya's incident, we have seen a lot of them, coming forward and saying, no, keeping Nirbhaya's incident apart, but there have been a lot of instances where the child might really not be aware of what they're doing. They might either be brainwashed, the poverty might be hitting them, the adolescence anger, a lot of things are there that will play a very, very important role in the crimes that they are committing. The best part of POCSO is that usually when I'm accusing someone, as an adult, when I'm accusing someone that, this person has committed the crime, the onus will always be on me also to prove that yes, he has committed. That becomes extremely challenging, because if I'm accusing you of doing something, I also have to show to the court that yes, Akshata has done this to me, right? Now, the best part of POCSO is when a child comes and tells that this person has sexually abused me, the onus shifts to that person, where he has to prove that, no, I haven't sexually abused the kid. The kid need not have to prove anything that the kid was, sexually abused. Only the person who has been, accused of will have to prove that, no, I have not sexually abused the kid. This is the best thing that, POCSO has given all the way.
Very nice. I mean, that can actually change the game. The entire game, where a person has to prove their innocence. It's not easy.
Yeah.
And the child is on face telling that he or she is offending them or sexually offending. So it's been very informative podcast, very eye-opening. And I could think of all those situations where you explained about a child being abused, a prostitute being abused. So is there any one thing, if you've given a superpower, one or two things that you want to change in our law system, anything?
Yeah, that is something that I would really want to change. Is I want to bring about fast track courts for any violation of human rights, right? We need fast track courts because people can't wait for 10 years, 15 years to get justice. See, it is very simple. Justice delayed is justice denied. True, right? So we don't want people to wait for years together to get justice. So the only gray area that we have right now is the time, right? We are overburdening the court. We are overburdening the judges also. We need more court setups. We need more judges. And we need fast-track courts to make sure that people are coming forward to file complaints. They're coming forward because they know that the other person who's accused is going to get punished within 6 months or 1 year. This is something that I am looking forward to bring about the change. If given a chance, I would want to do something so that I can bring about this major change in the country. The next thing that I want to bring about a change is, as much as laws that we have for women, we need laws for men also. So we need laws which is going to protect men as well, because there are a lot of instances where women have misused the law.
Recently, the one who committed suicide is where?
Yes, absolutely. We don't know what is the crux of it, but all we can tell is that yeah, there are laws which people claim that it is women centric. Absolutely, it is women centric. A lot of laws are there for women, but for men there are absolutely no laws which will protect their rights. I think we should also keep some laws for men wherein such women abusing men or misusing the law which is there should come down. And also, we need to consider the lives of sex workers. We need to make laws which is going to protect the sex workers. Make laws so that their livelihood is achieved. They are also given some status, and they're able to lead a peaceful life like any other person. So these are some of the things that I would want to bring about a change in the field of law.
Thank you so much, Lalita. So, yanine thiruko kai sharo gerit.
Thank you so much, Akshita, for inviting me for the podcast. It is my first time and I absolutely loved it. And thank you for making me feel like a. Thank you so much.
That's it for today's episode, where we learned a lot of things about rules, laws, and regulations which protect our women and children. A big thank you to Lalita for joining us. Subscribe to our podcast, where we bring in a diverse topic to discuss you wouldn't want to miss.